The supply manifest was wrong. Captain Avery Chin knew at the moment her eyes scanned the fuel load specifications for the F-22 Raptors sitting on the Nellis flight line. The numbers were off by exactly 300 gallons per aircraft. Most logistics officers would have missed it. Most logistics officers had never sat in a Raptor's cockpit at Mach 2.2, feeling how the aircraft drank fuel in combat maneuvers that officially did not exist. Avery had, 8 years ago, in skies over places that had no names on any map. But nobody at Nellis knew that. Nobody could know that. The woman who flew those missions was dead, at least according to every official record in the United States Air Force. Avery set down her tablet and walked to the warehouse window. Outside, the Nevada sun hammered down on the flight line, where 6 Raptors gleamed like predatory birds at rest. She could see the heat waves rising from the tarmac, could almost feel the weight of a flight helmet settling over her head, could hear the phantom whine of turbines spooling up. 3 years. 3 years since she had strapped into a cockpit and felt the earth drop away beneath her. 3 years of counting supplies and tracking inventory, while her hands remembered the feel of a control stick and her body remembered the crushing force of 9GS in a hard turn. The door to her office banged open. Airman First Class Tyrell Jasper stumbled in, his arms loaded with requisition forms that were already starting to slide from his grip. The young man's face carried the particular blend of panic and determination that Avery recognized from every struggling junior, enlisted person she had ever known. Before the forms could hit the floor, Avery moved. She caught the stack with one hand, her reflexes still sharp from years when a half-second delay meant death. "Thank you, ma'am," Jasper said, his relief obvious. "I cannot get these fuel requisitions to balance. The system keeps rejecting them," and Sergeant Kowalski said, "If I do not figure it out by 1400 hours, he's going to have me inventorying the entire warehouse with a hand counter." Avery glanced at the forms. The error was immediately clear. Someone had entered the fuel codes for F-15S instead of F-22S. Different engines, different consumption rates, different everything. She pulled out a pen and began making corrections, explaining each change in a way that would help Jasper catch the mistake himself next time. The young airman watched her work with growing comprehension, his shoulders gradually relaxing. "You just saved my life, Captain Chun," he said when she handed back the corrected forms. "How did you know all that?" "I thought logistics was just about tracking boxes." Avery allowed herself a small smile. "Every box matters, Airman, especially when those boxes keep $70 million aircraft in the sky. Now get those forms submitted before Sergeant Kowalski makes good on his threat." Jasper fled with appropriate gratitude. Avery returned to her desk and the photograph she kept in the bottom drawer. It showed a younger version of herself in a flight suit, helmet under one arm, standing in front of an F-22 with her face turned just enough away from the camera that only someone who knew her well would recognize the profile. No name tape was visible. No identifying marks. Just a pilot and her aircraft, frozen in a moment before everything changed. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed quiet competence being dismissed where you are from. The afternoon staff meeting was held in the base operations building, a utilitarian structure that smelled of coffee and ambition. Avery sat in the back row, tablet ready, prepared to give her weekly logistics update. Around the conference table sat the pilots, their flight suits crisp and adorned with patches that told stories of training and deployment. At the head of the table sat Colonel Marcus Draven, the wing commander whose career was built more on politics than performance. Draven was speaking about the upcoming readiness inspection, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone who believed his every word was worth recording for history. "We need to ensure that every system is operating at peak efficiency. Every aircraft must be mission ready. I will not tolerate any discrepancies that could reflect poorly on this wing." When it came time for Avery's report, she kept it concise. "Sir, I need to flag a discrepancy in the fuel load specifications for the F-22S. The current manifests show loads that are 300 gallons short of what is required for the training profile scheduled next week." If we do not correct this now, we will have aircraft running low on fuel during extended exercises." The room went quiet. Several pilots looked up from their phones. Draven's expression shifted from bored attention to something harder. "Captain Chun," he said, his voice acquiring an edge, "I appreciate your dedication to counting boxes, but fuel calculation for the F-22 are handled by qualified personnel. I reviewed those specifications myself this morning. They are correct." Avery held his gaze. "Sir, with respect, the specifications do not account for the fuel consumption during high-G maneuvers. The F-22 burns significantly more fuel in combat profiles than in standard flight. The current loads will leave approximately 15 minutes of operational time before pilots need to return to base." Draven leaned back in his chair. "Captain, have you ever flown an F-22? "No, sir," Avery lied, the words tasting like ash. "But I have studied the technical manuals extensively." "Then perhaps you should stick to what you know," Draven said. "Logistics. Let the actual pilots handle the flying. Major Sanderson, make a note that Captain Chen's concerns have been addressed." Moving on, Avery said nothing more. She had learned that some battles could not be won in conference rooms. But as the meeting continued, she noticed Lieutenant Cade Morrison watching her from across the table. The young F-22 pilot had a thoughtful expression, as if he was doing calculations of his own. After the meeting, Morrison caught up with Avery in the hallway. "Captain Chun," he said quietly, "about those fuel specs. Are you sure about the 15-minute margin?" Avery measured her response carefully. "The F-22's engine is a marvel of engineering, Lieutenant. But in sustained afterburner during combat maneuvers, fuel consumption can exceed standard calculations by as much as 40%. It is in the technical specifications, paragraph 4.7 of the operational manual." Morrison's eyes widened slightly. Most logistics officers do not read that deep into the flight manuals. Most logistics officers have not spent as much time thinking about aircraft as I have, Avery replied. She started to walk away, then paused. "Check the specs yourself, Lieutenant. Then make your own decision about fuel loads. That is what good pilots do." That night, Avery stood alone on the flight line, watching the Raptors gleaming under the Nevada stars. Her fingers traced unconscious patterns in the air. The barrel roll at Angels 20. The high-G turn that had saved her life over the South China Sea. The impossible shot that earned her the call sign nobody would ever use again. From the operations building behind her came the sound of pilots laughing, Draven's voice loudest among them. They had no idea that the woman who tracked their fuel consumption had once been the most lethal air combat pilot of her generation. And if the universe had any mercy, they never would. The alarm on Avery's phone pulled her from dreams of contrails and cannon fire at 0500 hours. She lay in the darkness of her quarters for a moment, listening to the distant sound of jets on the morning test runs. Once that sound had been her reveille, her call to purpose. Now it was just a reminder of everything she had given up. Her morning routine was precise. Physical training at 0530, shower at 0615, breakfast at 0630, desk by 0700. The structure helped. It gave her days the kind of order that kept the memories at bay, kept her from thinking too much about the last time she had pulled a control stick back and felt a fighter respond like an extension of her own will. The logistics warehouse smelled of cardboard and hydraulic fluid. Avery moved through the morning inventory checks with practiced efficiency, her tablet recording discrepancies that would need reconciliation. She was good at this work. It mattered, but it was not flying. "Captain Chun." The voice belonged to Master Sergeant Ryo Nakamura, the senior crew chief responsible for F-22 maintenance. The man was 63 years old with hands like weathered leather and eyes that missed nothing. "I need your signature on a parts requisition. Got a starboard intake sensor acting up on tail number 047. Avery pulled up the maintenance records on her tablet. "That is the third sensor issue on that aircraft this month. Have you checked the wiring harness connection at panel J7? Sometimes vibration from the engine can work the connection loose." Nakamura's expression shifted from routine to curious. "Panel J7 is not in the standard troubleshooting sequence for sensor faults. It should be, Avery said, keeping her voice neutral. I have seen similar cascading failures in the maintenance logs. Pattern suggests a common point failure rather than individual sensor defects. The crew chief studied her for a long moment. You read a lot of maintenance logs, Captain. Part of my job is tracking parts usage, Sergeant. I noticed patterns. Nakamura signed for his parts, but the look he gave Avery suggested he was noticing patterns of his own. She returned to her inventory work, pushing down the instinct that wanted to walk out to the flight line and put her hands on the aircraft to feel the panels and access points she had opened 100 times before in circumstances that officially never happened. At 1,030 hours, Lieutenant Morrison appeared in her office doorway. He held a tablet and wore the expression of someone who had just discovered something that challenged his understanding of the world. Captain Chun, he said, I checked those fuel consumption figures you mentioned yesterday. You were right. Paragraph 4.7 of the operational manual specifies increased consumption during sustained high-G maneuvers. I ran the calculations for next week's training profile. With the current fuel loads, we would hit bingo fuel with only 12 minutes of combat maneuvering available. Avery set down her pen. Did you bring this to Colonel Draven? I brought it to Major Sanderson first. He is going to brief the colonel this afternoon. Morrison stepped into the office and lowered his voice. How did you know? Most pilots do not even think about fuel consumption at that level of detail. We trust the specs we are given. Good pilots verify their specs, Lieutenant. Great pilots understand every system on their aircraft well enough to know when something is wrong before the gauges tell them. Morrison sat in the chair across from her desk without being invited, a breach of protocol that somehow felt right. My father was a pilot, he said. F-15S in the Gulf War. He used to tell me that flying is 10% skill and 90% knowledge. Knowledge of your aircraft, your weapons, your enemy, yourself. He said the pilots who forgot that were the ones who did not come home. Your father was a wise man. He died when I was 12. Training accident. Morrison's voice remained steady, but Avery heard the old pain underneath. That is why I fly. To understand what he loved enough to risk everything for. To be worthy of what he was. Avery felt something crack in the careful wall she had built around her past. She knew what it meant to love flying enough to risk everything. She knew what it meant to lose people who flew. She knew what it felt like when the sky took more than you were prepared to give. Your father would be proud of you, she said quietly. You asked the right questions about those fuel specs. That is what keeps pilots alive. Never accepting information without verification. Never assuming someone else knows better than your own instincts. Is that what you do, Captain? Trust your instincts? Avery met his eyes. I used to. A long time ago. What changed? The honest answer was too complicated, too dangerous. So Avery gave him a truth that was incomplete, but not false. I knew someone once who was an exceptional pilot, gifted in ways that made flying look effortless. But gifts are not enough. That pilot learned that lesson the hardest way possible. What happened? Sometimes the mission costs more than you are prepared to pay, Lieutenant. Even when you succeed. Morrison absorbed this in silence. Then he stood, came to attention, and offered a salute that was not required in an office setting, but felt appropriate anyway. Thank you for the lesson, ma'am. About fuel specs and about flying. After he left, Avery opened her desk drawer and looked at the photograph again. The woman in that picture had believed she was invincible. She had believed that skill and training and sheer determination could overcome any threat. Then came the mission over the South China Sea. The mission where she learned that even the best pilot in the world could not save everyone. The notification on her tablet pulled her back to the present. Mandatory attendance at afternoon briefing, 1,400 hours, operations building. Subject classified. She felt the familiar tingle at the base of her spine, the instinct that had kept her alive in situations where half a second of warning made the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Something was building, something that would change the careful equilibrium she had maintained for 3 years. At 1,355 hours, Avery walked into the operations building and saw General Patricia Wolf standing at the front of the briefing room. The base commander's presence turned a routine meeting into something significant. Avery took her seat in the back row and watched as pilots and senior officers filed in, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. Wolf waited until precisely 1,400 hours before speaking. Her voice carried the weight of command earned through 3 decades of service. What I'm about to tell you is classified. Nothing leaves this room without my explicit authorization. We have received intelligence indicating a credible threat to this installation and 3 other Air Force bases. The nature of the threat is sophisticated and requires immediate action. Draven leaned forward. What kind of threat, General? Wolf's expression hardened. Someone with detailed knowledge of F-22 systems is planning an attack that could compromise our aircraft. We are implementing enhanced security protocols effective immediately. All flights are restricted to essential operations only until further notice. Avery's hands gripped the edge of her tablet. She knew what detailed knowledge of F-22 systems could accomplish in hostile hands. She had exploited similar knowledge against enemy aircraft. The possibilities were terrifying. General Wolf's eyes swept the room and for just a moment locked with Avery's. In that glance was a question, a warning, and something that looked almost like an apology. Then the general continued her briefing, and Avery understood that the quiet life she had built was already over. The only question was how much of the truth would be required to save it. The security sweeps began at 0600 hours the next morning. Avery watched from her warehouse office as teams of security forces personnel moved through the flight line with detection equipment and hardened expressions. Every hangar was being searched, every maintenance log reviewed, every access point verified. This was not routine. This was the kind of response that came when intelligence suggested an imminent attack. She tried to focus on her daily reports, but her mind kept returning to the briefing. Someone with detailed knowledge of F-22 systems. The phrase echoed in her thoughts like a warning klaxon. There were perhaps 36 people in the world with the kind of systems knowledge that could pose a genuine threat to the Raptor. Avery was one of them. She had found vulnerabilities that the manufacturers did not know existed, had exploited weaknesses in enemy aircraft that used similar architecture, had pushed the F-22 beyond every supposed limit until she understood exactly where the aircraft's true boundaries lay. If someone with that knowledge had gone hostile, the danger was exponential. Captain Chun, Nakamura stood in her doorway again, but this time his usual calm demeanor showed cracks. I need to talk to you about something off the record. Avery gestured him inside and closed the door. What is wrong, Sergeant? The crew chief pulled a tablet from his pocket and set it on her desk. 3 days ago, someone accessed the maintenance computers during a 2-hour window when the security cameras in Hangar 4 were offline. System malfunction, according to the official report. But the logs show that someone with administrative credentials went into the flight control system diagnostics for tail numbers 041, 047, and 053. Avery felt ice forming in her chest. What kind of access? Deep access. The kind that could allow someone to understand the flight control architecture well enough to potentially compromise it. Nakamura met her eyes. I have been a crew chief for 38 years, Captain. I know what normal maintenance looks like. This was not normal. This was someone mapping the system. Have you reported this to security forces? I tried. Got stonewalled. They said the investigation is being handled at a higher level, and I should focus on my job. Nakamura's frustration was evident. So I am bringing it to you because you're the only person I have met in logistics who seems to actually understand these aircraft beyond supply requisitions. Avery studied the access logs. The pattern was methodical, professional. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for. They had started with the peripheral systems and worked inward, building a complete map of the flight control architecture without triggering any automated alarms. It was the approach she would have used if she were planning to exploit the aircraft. This needs to go higher than security forces, she said. This needs to reach General Wolf directly. I'm a master sergeant, Captain. I do not have direct access to the base commander. But I do. Avery pulled out her phone. I will get this to the general. Keep a copy of these logs secured somewhere off the network. After Nakamura left, Avery stared at the access logs for a long moment. Then she made a decision that she knew could unravel everything. She called General Wolf's office and used the priority access code that only 3 people on base possessed. The code that identified her as someone with security clearances that transcended normal rank structures. Wolf answered on the second ring. Her voice was carefully neutral. Captain Chun, I wondered when you would call. General, I have information about the security situation that requires your immediate attention. Come to my office. Use the side entrance. 15 minutes. The walk across base felt like crossing a minefield. Every step took Avery closer to a conversation that would force her to reveal knowledge she was not supposed to have, to acknowledge expertise that a logistics captain should not possess. But 3,000 people worked on this base. Their lives mattered more than her cover. Wolf's office was a study in control power. Flags stood in the corners, commendations lined the walls, and a photograph of the general shaking hands with the president occupied a place of honor behind her desk. Wolf herself sat ramrod straight, her gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her eyes carrying the weight of decisions that had sent young people into harm's way. Show me what you have, the general said without preamble. Avery laid out the access logs and explained the pattern. As she spoke, she watched Wolf's expression shift from concern to grave. When Avery finished, the general stood and walked to her window overlooking the flight line. You see things that most people miss, Captain Chun. Or should I say, you see things that most logistics officers would never notice. I read the technical manuals very carefully, General. Wolf turned to face her. We both know that is not the whole truth. She opened a desk drawer and removed a file folder marked with classification stamps that made most military intelligence look pedestrian. I have kept your secret for 3 years. I gave you my word that you could disappear into a quiet life. But circumstances have changed. Avery felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crack. What are you asking me, General? I am asking if you are willing to do what may be necessary when this situation escalates. And it will escalate, Avery. The intelligence we have suggests this is not just a probe. This is preparation for an active attack. I'm a logistics officer now. That was our agreement. Agreements adapt to reality. Wolf set the classified file on her desk. Inside that folder is everything. Your 47 confirmed kills. Your test pilot certifications. The missions that never happened in places that do not exist. The reason we faked your death. And the psychological evaluation that said you wanted peace more than you wanted to fly. I didn't want peace. I still do. Sometimes peace requires warriors, Captain. Wolf's voice carried a weight of command that Avery had not heard in 3 years. I am not ordering you to do anything. Not yet. But I need you to be ready. Because if this threat manifests the way I think it will, you may be the only person on this base who can stop it. Avery looked out the window at the Raptors gleaming in the afternoon sun. Somewhere out there, someone was planning to turn those beautiful machines into weapons against their own people. Someone who understood the systems well enough to make it work. And the terrible truth was that Wolf was right. There were very few people who could counter that level of expertise. Avery was one of them. I will be ready, General, but I need full access to the security investigation. I need to know everything you know about this threat. Wolf handed her a security badge with clearances that made her logistics captain rank look like a cover story, which Avery supposed was exactly what it was. You have access. Use it carefully. And Avery, one more thing. Yes, General, Colonel Draven cannot know about your background. Not yet. He is a political creature, and this situation requires operational thinking. Can you work within that constraint? Avery thought about Draven's dismissive attitude, his arrogant certainty that he knew better than everyone around him. Working under his command while possessing knowledge that dwarfed his experience would be frustrating. But she had survived worse frustrations in her career. I can manage, General. That night, Avery sat in her quarters with the classified files spread across her desk. The threat assessment made her blood run cold. Whoever was planning this understood not just the F-22 systems, but the base's defensive protocols, the response timelines, the vulnerabilities in command structure. This was an inside job. Someone on Nellis had detailed knowledge and hostile intent. She thought about Morrison's eager questions and Nakamura's suspicious logs and Draven's incompetent posturing. Somewhere in the complex web of this base was a traitor with the knowledge to kill thousands. And standing between that traitor and catastrophe was a dead woman who had once been the most lethal pilot in American military history. A woman who had walked away from the sky because it had taken too much from her. A woman who was about to discover that some debts could never be fully paid. Avery closed the files and looked at her hands. They were steady. They had always been steady, even when the world around her was fire and chaos and the screaming of alarms. She had hoped those hands would never grip a control stick again. But hope, she was learning, was a luxury that warriors could not always afford. Colonel Marcus Draven stood in his office reviewing the morning briefing materials and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The security situation had elevated his profile with higher command. General Wolfe relied on his assessments. The wing was running smoothly under his leadership. Everything was proceeding exactly as it should for an officer destined for stars on his shoulders. The problem was Captain Chun. Draven had noticed her at the staff meeting, the way she spoke about fuel consumption with unwarranted confidence. Logistics officers did not question pilot operations. They fulfilled requests and maintained supplies. The proper order of things required people to stay in their lanes. Chun seemed unable to grasp this basic principle. He made a note to have a conversation with her supervisor about maintaining appropriate boundaries. Officers who overreached their authority created problems. Draven had not built his career by tolerating problems. His phone buzzed with a message from Major Elise Durand in operations. Need to discuss personnel matter. Your office, 1,000 hours. Draven checked his calendar and confirmed the appointment. Durand was competent, professional, and appropriately deferential to rank. Unlike certain logistics officers, across the base in the warehouse office, Avery was building a profile of the insider threat. She had spent the night reviewing access logs, personnel files, and security footage. The picture emerging was troubling. Whoever had compromised the maintenance systems had intimate knowledge of base operations, security protocols, and F-22 architecture. The list of people with all three areas of expertise was disturbingly short. Lieutenant Morrison appeared in her doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one on her desk without asking permission, a gesture that was becoming familiar. Thought you might need this, Captain. You look like you've been here all night. Just got in early, Avery lied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Thank you, Lieutenant. Morrison settled into the chair across from her desk. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about your friend who was an exceptional pilot, the one who learned the hard lessons. That was a private conversation, Lieutenant. I know, but I cannot stop thinking about it. Morrison leaned forward, his young face serious. My father used to say that every great pilot has a story they do not tell, a mission that changed them, a moment when they realized that skill alone was not enough. He never told me his story. He died before I was old enough to ask the right questions. Avery studied the young pilot. He reminded her of the officers she had flown with before everything fell apart. Idealistic, but not naive. Brave, but not reckless. The kind of pilot who might survive long enough to become truly great if the world gave him the chance. Your father was protecting you, she said quietly. Some stories are too heavy to share with the people you love. Maybe. But I think he was also protecting himself from having to remember. Morrison met her eyes. I see that same look in you sometimes, Captain. Like you are protecting yourself from something that still hurts. The observation was too accurate. Avery deflected with a question. Why are you really here, Lieutenant? This is not about coffee or philosophy. Morrison pulled out his tablet. I have been reviewing the flight schedules for the past month. There's a pattern I cannot explain. 3 times in the last 4 weeks. Someone has modified training routes to take aircraft over specific grid coordinates. The changes were approved at a high level but the justification in the records is vague. Show me. Avery studied the flight paths Morrison displayed. The modifications were subtle, the kind of thing most people would dismiss as routine operational adjustments. But she recognized what she was seeing. Someone was using training flights to map specific locations, to verify timing and positioning for something larger. It was reconnaissance disguised as routine operations. Who approved these modifications? Morrison scrolled to the authorization codes. Major Durand signed off on all three. Avery felt pieces clicking into place. Durand had access to operations, intimate knowledge of scheduling, and the authority to make changes without drawing scrutiny. She pulled up Durand's personnel file on her secured tablet. The major was 36, academy graduate, solid performance reviews, no obvious red flags. But when Avery cross-referenced Durand's career timeline with her own classified service record, she found something interesting. 6 years ago, both of them had been at Nellis simultaneously. Avery as a test pilot using a different identity. Durand as a junior operations officer. Had Durand discovered something during that overlap? Had she pieced together fragments of Avery's real identity? This information needs to reach General Wolfe, Avery said. Can you compile a full report on these flight modifications? Already done. Morrison transferred the file to her tablet. I figured you would know what to do with it. You always seem to know what to do. The trust in his voice made Avery's chest tighten. Morrison had no idea who he was really talking to, what she had done, what she had lost. He saw a competent logistics officer who paid attention to details. If he knew the truth, would he still look at her with that respect? You are a good officer, Lieutenant. Your father would be proud of the pilot you are becoming. I hope so. Morrison stood to leave, then paused. Captain, can I ask you something personal? You can ask. I may not answer. Do you ever regret the choices you made? The ones that kept you from doing what you really wanted? Avery thought about the cockpit she would never sit in again, the sky that had once been her home, the pilot she had lost and could not save. Every single day, she wanted to say. Instead, she gave him the truth he could handle. Regret is the price we pay for the wisdom to know what really matters, Lieutenant. The question is whether the wisdom was worth the cost. After Morrison left, Avery sent an encrypted message to General Wolfe about Durand. Then she did something she had not done in 3 years. She pulled up the classified flight simulator program on her secure computer and loaded the F-22 training module. Her hands moved over the keyboard, inputting the scenarios she had once flown in reality. Combat intercept, high G evasion, multiple bogey engagements. The muscle memory was still there. Her mind still calculated angles and closure rates and weapons parameters with unconscious precision. 3 years away from the cockpit had not erased what years of training had built in her nervous system. She was still a fighter pilot. She had just been pretending not to be. The simulation ran through an engagement scenario that matched the current threat profile. Enemy forces using compromised F-22s against friendly installations. The tactical problem was brutal. How did you stop aircraft that matched your own capabilities, flown by systems that knew all your defensive protocols? Avery ran the scenario 5 times. Failed 4 times. On the 5th attempt, she found the answer. It required accepting damage to friendly forces. It required sacrifice. It required a pilot willing to push an F-22 beyond safe operational limits, to create an opening that should not exist. It required someone like her. She saved the simulation data and closed the program. Through her window, she could see Draven walking across the flight line, his bearing radiating self-importance. He had no idea that the real threat to his command was not external enemies, but his own incompetence. His inability to see what was happening under his authority. His certainty that rank equaled wisdom. Avery's phone buzzed with a response from General Wolfe. Meet me at 1800 hours. Flight simulator building. Come alone. Bring your flight suit. The message was both a summons and a recognition. Wolfe was done pretending. The situation had escalated beyond the point where Avery could remain hidden. She would have to step back into the role she had abandoned, become the pilot she had buried, faced the sky that had taken everything from her. Her hands were steady as she typed a response. Acknowledged. Will comply. But inside, in the place where fear and determination lived in equal measure, Avery Chen wondered if 3 years was enough time to prepare for resurrection. If the pilot who had once been called the Reaper could rise from the dead without becoming the thing she feared most, a weapon that could not stop killing, even when the war was over. The flight suit hung in Avery's closet like a ghost from a life she had tried to bury. She had kept it against regulations, against common sense, against every promise she had made to herself about moving forward. The fabric still smelled faintly of jet fuel and sweat, and the particular mixture of fear and exhilaration that came from pushing a fighter aircraft to its absolute limits. She pulled it on at 1,730 hours. The fit was still perfect. Her body had maintained the fitness that combat aviation demanded even after 3 years of logistics work. Muscle memory ran deeper than conscious choice. As she zipped up the suit and checked the pockets, Avery felt herself sliding back into the skin of the person she had been. Captain Avery Chun, test pilot. The Reaper. The woman with 47 kills who had disappeared from official existence because staying alive meant staying dead. The walk to the flight simulator building took her past the operations center where pilots were gathering for the evening brief. She saw Morrison among them, his young face animated as he discussed something with the other lieutenants. He glanced up as she passed, and his expression shifted to confusion. A logistics officer in a flight suit was an anomaly that did not compute with the world as he understood it. Avery kept walking. Explanations would come soon enough, or never, depending on how the next few hours unfolded. General Wolf was waiting in Simulator Bay 3, the advanced training module reserved for classified exercises. The general's expression was unreadable as Avery entered, but her eyes took in the flight suit with something that looked like relief. Good, Wolf said. You kept it. I was not certain you would. Old habits, General. Or maybe I always knew this day would come. Wolf gestured to the simulator cockpit, a perfect replica of an F-22 interior with wraparound screens and full motion capability. Get in. I need to see if 3 years away has dulled your edge. Avery climbed into the cockpit and felt the years collapse. Her hands found the controls without conscious thought. Throttle, stick, system panels. Everything exactly where it should be. She ran through the startup sequence from memory, her fingers dancing across switches and buttons in a pattern burned in her nervous system by thousands of hours in actual aircraft. The simulation loaded. Wolf's voice came through the headset. Scenario Alpha 7. Multiple hostile aircraft using F-22 parameters. Compromised friendly systems. You are outnumbered and outpositioned. Show me how you survive. The scenario was brutal. 4 enemy aircraft with performance matching the Raptor, positioned in a textbook kill box with Avery at the center. Her defensive systems were degraded, her weapons limited, her fuel state critical. It was the kind of situation that killed pilots who hesitated or followed standard doctrine. Avery did neither. She pushed the throttle forward and pulled into a climb that should have stalled the aircraft, but instead used the Raptor's thrust vectoring to achieve an impossible angle of attack. The enemy formation broke, trying to track her, their AI-controlled responses following predicted patterns. Avery knew those patterns. She had helped write them. She exploited the microsecond delay between threat detection and response, positioned herself in the brief window where their targeting solutions fell apart, and fired. First kill, then a roll that put her below the second enemy's radar cone. Second kill. The remaining 2 aircraft adapted, their programming learning from her tactics. But Avery was already 3 moves ahead, using the terrain and her intimate knowledge of the F-22's flight envelope to create angles that the AI did not anticipate. Third kill came at a cost. She had to accept damage to her own aircraft, trading armor for position. The fourth kill required her to push the aircraft beyond rated stress limits, pulling GS that would have caused structural failure in anything less than a Raptor. Simulation ended. For kills, 0 losses. Time elapsed. For minutes, 37 seconds. Avery's hands were shaking slightly as she pulled off the helmet. Not from fear, from the raw adrenaline of combat, even simulated combat, from the recognition that 3 years had not diminished her skills. If anything, the time away had given her perspective that made her even more dangerous. Wolf's voice was quiet. That was the fastest successful completion of Scenario Alpha 7 ever recorded. The previous record holder took 11 minutes and accepted 3 friendly casualties. Who held the previous record? General? You did. 8 years ago, under a different name in a different life. Avery climbed out of the cockpit. Her legs were steady, but her heart was racing. The simulation had awakened something she thought she had buried. The part of her that lived for the moment of pure focus when nothing existed except the aircraft and the threat and the razor-thin margin between life and death. "I need you ready to fly for real," Wolf said. "The intelligence has escalated. We believe the attack will come within 72 hours, possibly sooner." "What kind of attack?" "Remote hijacking of F-22s during training flights. The enemy will take control and use our own aircraft against ground installations. Thousands of casualties if they succeed." Wolf handed Avery a tablet displaying the threat assessment. "The only counter is a pilot who can outfly the hijack systems. Force them down before they reach their targets. Someone with knowledge of the vulnerabilities in the control architecture. Someone like me. You're the only person I trust for this, Avery. The only pilot with the skills and the knowledge to pull off." Avery looked at the threat assessment. The tactical problem was exactly what she had anticipated. The solution was exactly what she had feared. Get in a Raptor. Hunt down compromised American aircraft. Engage and destroy if necessary. Become a weapon again. What about Colonel Draven? He is the wing commander. This falls under his authority. Wolf's expression hardened. Draven is a politician who happened to be a mediocre pilot 20 years ago. He has never seen real combat. He would follow doctrine and get people killed. This situation requires someone who can operate outside doctrine because they understand it well enough to know when it does not apply. "You're asking me to reveal myself. My identity. Everything we buried. I am asking you to save 3,000 lives." Wolf met her eyes. "The choice is yours, Captain. I will not order you to do this. But if you say no, I need to know now so I can find another option, even if that option is inferior." Avery thought about Morrison and his dreams of being a great pilot, about Nakamura and his decades of service keeping aircraft flying, about the junior enlisted personnel who worked in maintenance and logistics and had no idea that their lives hung in the balance of decisions being made in classified briefings. She thought about the pilots she had lost over the South China Sea, the squadron she cannot save. The reason she had accepted death in official records rather than face the families of the people who did not come home. This was different. This was a chance to prevent the loss rather than mourn it afterward. A chance to use the skills that had cost her so much for something more than killing enemy pilots who were just doing their job for their own countries. "When do I fly, General?" Wolf allowed herself a slight smile. "We maintain the cover for now. You remain a logistics officer until the moment we need you. But you're on alert status starting immediately. When the attack comes, you will have minutes to suit up and launch." "Understood. One more thing." Wolf's expression became somber. "If you have to engage American aircraft, even hijacked ones, it will be politically complicated. There will be investigations, questions. Your identity will become public knowledge. The life you built here will be over. It was already over the moment you called me to this simulator, General. We both knew that." Avery walked back to her quarters as the sun set over the Nevada desert. The base was settling into its evening rhythm. Pilots heading to the officers' club. Maintenance crews finishing shift. Security forces conducting perimeter checks. Normal operations masking the crisis building beneath the surface. In her room, Avery laid out her gear. Flight suit, helmet, boots, gloves. The tools of a trade she had sworn to abandon. She looked at the photograph from her desk drawer one final time. The young pilot who believed she could save everyone, who learned through blood and fire that even the best skills had limits. But limits could be pushed, boundaries could be tested, And sometimes the only way to save the people you cared about was to become the thing you feared most. Avery set the photograph down and began her pre-flight mental preparation, running through emergency procedures, reviewing system specifications, calculating intercept vectors and weapons parameters, preparing for the moment when Captain Avery Chun would stop pretending to be a logistics officer and remember what it meant to be the Reaper, the most lethal air combat pilot of her generation, rising from the dead to fight one more battle, whether she survived it or not. The alarm screamed through Nellis Air Force Base at 0427 hours. Not a drill, not a test, the real thing. Avery was awake and moving before her conscious mind registered the sound. She had slept in her flight suit, boots within arm's reach, prepared for the call that statistics and intelligence had promised was coming. Her phone showed a single encrypted message from General Wolf. Hangar 4. 2 aircraft compromised. Launch authorization granted. Code Black protocols in effect. Code Black meant the nightmare scenario was real. Somewhere beyond the base perimeter, someone had activated the hijack protocols. 2 F-22 Raptors were now autonomous weapons systems aimed at American targets. Avery ran. The distance from her quarters to Hangar 4 was 800 meters. She covered it in under 3 minutes, her cardiovascular conditioning exactly what it needed to be for a pilot about to pull 9GS in combat maneuvers. The hangar was chaos. Security forces establishing perimeter. Maintenance crews scrambling to verify systems. And at the center of it all, 2 F-22s with engines spooling up without pilots in the cockpits. General Wolf stood in the command center, her face illuminated by displays showing aircraft telemetry and threat assessments. She saw Avery and gestured her forward. The hijack is active. Both aircraft will be airborne in 4 minutes. Initial trajectory suggests they are targeting the operations center and the fuel depot. Estimated casualties if they reach target are 2,300. Where is Colonel Draven? Attempting to organize a response that will not work. Wolf handed Avery a headset. You are cleared to launch from Hangar 2. Your aircraft is tail number 089, fully armed and fueled. Nakamura's crew has been preparing it since midnight. Does Nakamura know who I am? He knows you are someone who can stop this. That is enough for now. Avery took the headset and started toward Hangar 2. Behind her, she heard Draven's voice raised in anger, demanding to know who had authorized a logistics officer to access a combat aircraft. Wolf's response was sharp enough to cut steel. I authorized it, Colonel, under Code Black protocols. If you have concerns, file them after we prevent 2,000 deaths. Hangar 2 was a cathedral of military aviation. The F-22 waiting for her was perfect. Every panel aligned, every system checked. Nakamura stood beside the crew ladder, his weathered face showing no surprise at seeing a logistics captain in full flight gear. She is ready, ma'am, the crew chief said quietly. I do not know who you really are, but I know what you need to do. Bring our people home safe. Avery met his eyes. That is the plan, Sergeant. She climbed the ladder and dropped into the cockpit. The seat molded to her body like it had been waiting 3 years for her return. Her hands moved through the startup sequence automatically. Avionics online. Weapons hot. Flight controls responsive. She was not just sitting in a fighter aircraft. She was becoming part of it. The merger of pilot and machine that defined the razor edge of air combat supremacy. Tower cleared her for immediate departure. The hijacked aircraft were already rolling. Avery pushed throttle to full military power and felt the Raptor surge forward. The runway lights blurred into a continuous stream. Rotation speed. Liftoff. Gear retraction. The ground fell away and the pre-dawn sky opened before her. This is Reaper, she transmitted on the secure frequency. I am airborne and tracking the hostile aircraft. The response came from the operations center. A different voice than Wolf's. Younger. Morrison. His tone carried shock and confusion and something that might have been awe. Captain Chun, what are you doing in that aircraft? My job, Lieutenant. Stand by. The tactical display showed both hijacked F-22s climbing to attack altitude. Their flight profiles were perfect. Too perfect. They were following algorithms designed to optimize fuel consumption and weapons delivery. The kind of programming that came from someone who understood these aircraft intimately. Avery accessed the secure intelligence feed. The source of the hijack signal had been triangulated to a location on base. Building 17. The operations administrative offices. Major Durand's workspace. So the suspicions had been correct. Durand was the insider. The question was why. What drove a decorated officer to betray her own people? Focus on the immediate problem, Avery told herself. Motivations could wait. Right now, 2 weapons were heading toward populated areas. She had perhaps 8 minutes before they reached firing position. She pushed into afterburner and felt the acceleration press her into her seat. The Raptor responded like it had missed her, like these 3 years apart had been a separation it had endured rather than forgotten. She climbed through Angel's 15 and activated her targeting systems. The first hijacked aircraft appeared on her scope. Tail number 041. She recognized it from the maintenance logs Nakamura had shown her. The aircraft that had been accessed during the security camera outage. Durand's test bed for the hijack protocols. Reaper has visual on hostile one, she transmitted. Beginning intercept. The hijacked aircraft did not respond to her approach. Its programming had one objective: reach the target and deliver weapons. Everything else was irrelevant. That single-mindedness was both its strength and its weakness. Avery understood because she had trained pilots who flew with that same focused intensity. But she had also learned that the best combat aviators knew when to abandon the plan and improvise. She positioned herself in the hijacked aircraft's jet wash, close enough that their proximity alarms should have triggered. Nothing. The compromised systems were ignoring normal safety protocols. Avery keyed her radio to guard frequency, the emergency channel that every aircraft monitored. Aircraft on heading 045 at Angels 20. This is an intercept aircraft on your 6. You are in restricted airspace. Alter course immediately or I will be forced to engage. The hijacked Raptor continued its approach vector without deviation. Avery armed her weapons. The tactical problem was brutal. She needed to force these aircraft down without destroying them if possible. American jets flown by American systems, even compromised ones, were not the same as enemy combatants. Every regulation and rule of engagement said avoid friendly fire at all costs. But every tactical reality said that 2,000 lives outweighed 2 aircraft. She made her decision. Position herself for a gun run. The F-22's cannon was designed for air-to-air engagement. She would target the engine, attempting to disable rather than destroy. It was the kind of precision shot that required absolute control and perfect timing. The kind of shot she had made before in circumstances that officially never happened. Reaper is engaging hostile one, she transmitted. All personnel stand clear. She fired. The cannon rounds stitched across the sky, tracking toward the hijacked aircraft's starboard engine. Her targeting was perfect. The rounds impacted exactly where she intended. The engine flamed out. The aircraft began to descend. But the hijack programming adapted. The damaged Raptor rolled inverted in dove, not retreating, but accelerating towards target on one engine, using the dive to build speed for a kamikaze run. Avery's heart went cold. The algorithm was more sophisticated than she had anticipated. It was willing to sacrifice the aircraft to complete the mission, which meant the second aircraft would be equally ruthless. She dove after the damaged Raptor, pushing her own aircraft into a vertical descent that made her altimeter unwind like a broken watch. The forces built as she pulled out of the dive, her vision tunneling, her breathing force through the pressure of acceleration. She came level with the damaged aircraft and matched its course. Then she did something that no doctrine would ever recommend. She positioned her Raptor directly between the hijacked aircraft and its target, making herself the obstacle, forcing the compromised system to choose between aborting or colliding with a friendly aircraft. The hijacked Raptor's programming faced a decision it was not designed to handle. Collision avoidance protocols fought with mission completion directives. For 3 seconds, the aircraft wavered. Then it broke off, turning away from the target and from Avery's blocking position. She forced it down with a series of aggressive maneuvers, herding it toward the emergency landing strip on the base's western edge. The aircraft touched down hard, its single engine straining, and rolled to a stop. Hostile 1 is on the ground, Avery transmitted. Engaging Hostile 2. The second hijacked aircraft was closer to its target. Avery checked her fuel state and weapons load. She had enough for one more engagement. Maybe. Captain Chun, Morrison's voice broke through on the secure channel. I have accessed Major Duran's workspace. She is gone. Fled before security could respond. But I found her computer. The files show she has been planning this for 6 months. There is something else. What, Lieutenant? She has files on you. Your real service record. Your classified missions. She knew who you were, Captain. That is why she did this. She wanted to prove she was better than the Reaper. Avery felt the pieces fall into place. Durand had not just committed treason for ideology or money. She had done it for ego, for the chance to prove that her tactical planning could defeat the pilot she had discovered was hiding in plain sight. It was personal. Professional jealousy turned into betrayal, turned into mass murder. The second hijacked aircraft appeared on Avery's scope. It was already in attack position. She had seconds, not minutes. This was the shot that would define everything. The moment when Captain Avery Chun became the Reaper again in full view of everyone watching. The resurrection that would end her quiet life forever. She armed her missiles and prepared to engage. On the ground below, 3,000 people went about their morning routines, completely unaware that their lives hung in the balance of a dead woman's skill. The second hijacked F-22 was 20 seconds from weapons release. Avery calculated angles, closure rates, and probabilities with a cold precision that had kept her alive through 47 air-to-air engagements. The tactical problem was clean. Simple missile shot. High probability of kill. Stop the threat before it reached the fuel depot, where 200 base personnel were working morning shift. But simple did not mean easy. The hijacked aircraft was American. The people who built it and maintained it were Americans. Destroying it meant accepting that sometimes protecting your own people required destroying your own equipment. Required making choices that looked like failure, even when they were the only path to success. Avery locked her targeting radar. The hijacked Raptor did not evade. Its programming was committed to the attack run. Single-minded. Predictable. Dead. Fox 3. She transmitted and fired her AMRAAM missile. The weapon left the rail with a thump she felt through the airframe. Its rocket motor ignited, pushing it toward Mach 4. The hijacked aircraft finally responded, deploying countermeasures and attempting evasive maneuvers. But the response came too late. The missile tracked through the chaff and flares, following the thermal signature that no countermeasure could fully mask. Impact. The hijacked Raptor's starboard wing sheared away in a ball of flame. The aircraft tumbled from the sky, its weapons still armed but no longer able to deliver them to target. Avery watched it fall, tracking its descent to ensure it would hit desert rather than inhabited areas. The wreckage impacted 2 miles west of the fuel depot, throwing a plume of smoke into the pre-dawn sky. Hostile 2 is down, she transmitted. Threat neutralized. The radio erupted with voices. Controllers confirming the kill. Security forces mobilizing to secure the crash site. General Wolf ordering immediate lockdown and investigation. And beneath it all, a deeper current of shock. People who had worked with Captain Avery Chun for 3 years, who thought they knew her, suddenly confronting evidence that she was someone else entirely. Reaper, return to base, Wolf ordered. Land on runway 07. I will meet you on the flight line. Acknowledged. Avery brought the Raptor around in a gentle turn, bleeding off airspeed and altitude. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind the familiar emptiness that followed combat. She had killed before, 47 times, but those had been enemy pilots in enemy aircraft over hostile territory. This was different. This was an American F-22 that she had just destroyed to save American lives. The mathematics were sound. The ethics were clear, but the weight was still heavy. She lined up for final approach. The runway stretched before her, bordered by emergency vehicles and security forces. As her wheels touched down, she saw the crowd gathering. Pilots and crew chiefs and administrative personnel, drawn by the drama of what had just unfolded. Drawn by the impossible sight of a logistics officer flying combat and winning. Avery taxied to the designated spot and shut down the engines. The sudden silence after the roar of turbines felt profound. She removed her helmet and sat in the cockpit for a moment, feeling the ghost of her past life settling back over her shoulders like a coat she had tried to discard but could never quite abandon. The canopy opened. She climbed out and down the ladder. General Wolfe was waiting at the bottom, her expression unreadable. Behind her stood Morrison, his young face showing confusion and admiration in equal measure. Nakamura stood with his maintenance crew, nodding slowly as if pieces of a long puzzle were finally fitting together. In the back of the crowd stood Colonel Draven, his face white with shock and something that looked like dawning horror at how badly he had misjudged the quiet captain he had dismissed. "Outstanding work," Wolfe said formally. "We will debrief in my office." 30 minutes. Her eyes carried a message that her words did not. The reckoning was coming. The explanations. The end of anonymity. Avery nodded. Then Morrison stepped forward, unable to contain himself any longer. "Captain Chun," he said, "that flying. Those maneuvers. I have never seen anything like it. How did you learn to fly like that?" Before Avery could answer, Wolfe spoke. "Lieutenant Morrison, Captain Chin's flight credentials will be explained during the official debrief. For now, return to your duties." "But, General," Morrison persisted, "she just saved 3,000 lives. We deserve to know who she really is." "You will know," Wolfe said. "Soon enough. Everyone will know." Nakamura approached as the crowd began to disperse. He carried a clipboard, his excuse for being there, but his eyes held questions. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I have been a crew chief for 38 years. I have prepared aircraft for some of the finest pilots in the Air Force. But I have never seen anyone fly the way you just did. That was not standard training. That was combat experience. It was what needed to be done, Sergeant." "No, ma'am. With respect, it was more than that." Nakamura's voice dropped even lower. "I knew someone once. Long time ago. Different base. Different name. But same call sign. Reaper. They told me that pilot died in a classified accident. They told me to forget I ever heard the name." Avery met his eyes. "Some stories stay buried for good reasons, Sergeant. And some stories need to be told." Nakamura handed her the clipboard. "Just wanted you to know, whoever you were before, whoever you are now, you have my respect. And my silence if you need it." "Thank you, Rio." The use of his first name seemed to confirm what he suspected. He saluted, sharp and precise, and walked away. Avery watched him go, grateful for allies she had not known she possessed. The debriefing room was small and windowless. Avery sat across from General Wolfe with Morrison beside her. The lieutenant had been invited at Avery's request. He deserved to hear the truth from her rather than through official channels or base rumors. Wolfe laid a file on the table. It was thick enough to represent years of service. The classification markings were extensive. She opened it to the first page, which showed a photograph of a younger Avery in a flight suit with patches that Morrison did not recognize. "Lieutenant Morrison, what you are about to hear is classified top secret. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement. You will not discuss this with anyone outside this room without explicit authorization. Do you understand?" "Yes, General." Wolfe turned to Avery. "Tell him." Avery took a breath. "My name is Avery Chun. That part is true. 8 years ago, I was selected for a classified test pilot program. I flew missions that do not exist in official records. Over the course of 4 years, I engaged enemy aircraft in contested airspace. 47 successful engagements. 0 losses. I earned the call sign Reaper." Morrison's eyes widened, but he remained silent. 3 years ago, during a mission over the South China Sea, my squadron was ambushed. I was the only survivor. The enemy knew we were coming. There was a leak. We lost 12 aircraft and 24 pilots in under 10 minutes. After that mission, I was officially declared dead and reassigned to a new identity in a non-combat role. Why? Morrison asked. Because the leaks suggested someone high in the command structure was compromised. Because keeping me alive meant keeping me hidden. Because I wanted to stop flying. The last part was delivered quietly. Avery met Mordishinskeish. I lost my entire squadron, Lieutenant. People I trained with. People I trusted. I survived because I was good at killing. But I could not save the people I cared about. So I chose to step away. To become someone who pushed supplies instead of pushing boundaries. And Major Durand discovered your identity, Wolf said. She accessed your classified records through a back channel. Became obsessed with proving she could defeat the legendary Reaper. Spent 6 months planning this attack. Morrison processed this. So this whole thing was personal. She betrayed her country because of jealousy. Pride, Wolf corrected. The most dangerous sin in military service. The belief that individual glory matters more than mission success. Durand could not accept that someone she considered inferior, a mere logistics officer, was actually the finest combat pilot of a generation. Where is she now? Morrison asked. FBI has her in custody. She was attempting to flee to Mexico. She will face courts-martial and federal charges. Wolf closed the file. But that is not the important question. The important question is what happens now. Avery knew what was coming. My cover is blown. Everyone on base knows that a logistics officer just flew combat. There will be questions, investigations, media attention, all of which I will manage, Wolf said. But I need to know your intentions, Captain. Do you want to return to flight status? Come in from the cold and become the Reaper again? Or do you want me to create a new cover, send you somewhere else to disappear again? Morrison looked at Avery with an expression that mixed hope and concern. You should fly, Captain. The world needs pilots like you. I need pilots like you. To learn from. To understand what real skill looks like. Avery thought about the empty sky and the weight of the stick and the perfect moment when aircraft and pilot became one unified weapon. She thought about the 12 pilots she had lost. The family she could never face, the guilt that had driven her into hiding. But she also thought about the 3,000 lives she had saved this morning, about Morrison's eager questions and Nakamura's quiet respect, about the possibility that her skills could protect instead of just destroy. I need time, she said. This is not a decision I can make in 30 minutes. You have 24 hours, Wolf said. Then I need an answer, because one way or another, Captain Shun, your story is about to become public knowledge, and you need to decide who you want to be when it does. The base operated under lockdown protocols for the next 18 hours. Security forces swept every building. Intelligence officers interviewed every person with access to classified systems. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Avery Chen sat in her quarters trying to decide whether to resurrect a ghost or bury it deeper. She had not slept. Could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the hijacked F-22 tumbling from the sky, its wing torn away by her missile. She saw the faces of the 12 pilots she had lost over the South China Sea. She saw Morrison's expression when he learned the truth, the mixture of awe and disappointment that she had been hiding. At 0800 hours, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Morrison standing there with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that said he had not slept either. Thought you might need this, he said, offering one of the cups. Avery accepted it and gestured him inside. They sat at her small table, the silence stretching between them like the distance between who she had been and who she was trying to become. My father used to have nightmares, Morrison said finally. He never told me what they were about, but I would hear him sometimes, late at night, making sounds like he was trying to warn someone, trying to save them. He paused. I think I understand now what he was dreaming about. The people you cannot save are heavier than the ones you can, Avery said quietly. They stay with you. Every mission, every flight, every decision. Is that why you stopped flying? Because of the weight? I stopped flying because I was tired of being a weapon. Tired of measuring my worth by how efficiently I could kill. Avery looked out her window at the flight line. When you're good at something terrible, people keep asking you to do terrible things, even when those things are necessary. Even when they save lives, the cost still accumulates. But you flew yesterday. You saved 3,000 people. I destroyed an American aircraft, forced another one down, ended Major Durand's career and probably her freedom. The mathematics say it was worth it. But mathematics do not account for how it feels. Morrison set down his coffee. Can I tell you what I saw yesterday, Captain? I saw a pilot who had every reason to stay hidden, to protect herself, choose instead to protect everyone else. I saw someone who could have let other pilots try and fail, let the situation become someone else's problem, decide that some things matter more than personal safety. That is called doing your job, Lieutenant. No, ma'am. With respect, that is called being a leader. Morrison leaned forward. I've been thinking about what you said, about your friend who was an exceptional pilot, the one who learned the hard lessons. You were not talking about someone else. You were talking about yourself. Avery met his eyes. I was talking about a version of myself that does not exist anymore. Maybe you were talking about a version that has been hiding, waiting for a reason to come back. There was another knock at the door. Nakamura stood outside, his weathered face showing concern. Ma'am, General Wolf needs you at base operations. Situation has developed. What kind of situation, Sergeant? The kind that needs the Reaper. The operations center was packed with senior officers and intelligence personnel. General Wolf stood at the central display, which showed satellite imagery and real-time data feeds. She looked up as Avery entered, her expression grim. We have a problem, the general said without preamble. Major Durand had a partner, someone off base who has access to the hijack protocols. Intelligence intercepted communications indicating another attack is planned for 1,300 hours today. Larger scale, for aircraft instead of 2. Avery studied the display. Where? 3 F-22s from Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. 1 from Tyndall in Florida. All 4 will be hijacked simultaneously during a coordinated training exercise. Their targets are population centers: Washington, D.C., Norfolk, Miami, and Atlanta. Estimated casualties? Conservative estimate is 50,000. If they reach downtown targets, potentially twice that. The room went silent. Avery felt every eye on her, waiting for her response. She looked at the tactical problem displayed on the screens. For simultaneous attacks across 1,000 miles. Conventional intercept would require coordination between multiple bases, multiple command structures, multiple response timelines. It would be slow, bureaucratic, almost certainly too late. What assets do we have, she asked. Wolf pulled up another display. We can scramble F-15s from multiple locations. Put up a defensive screen. Hope we can intercept before the hijacked aircraft reach their targets. Hope is not a strategy, General. No, which is why I need you to tell me if there is another option. Avery studied the data. Flight paths, timing, weapons loads. The hijack protocols would follow similar patterns to the attack at Nellis. Predictable in their efficiency. Vulnerable to someone who understood their logic. There is one option, she said slowly. For F-22s flying in coordinated attack, someone would need to intercept all 4 before they reach their targets. Someone who knows the hijack protocols well enough to exploit their weaknesses. Someone who can engage multiple targets in rapid sequence across significant distances. Wolf nodded. Someone like you. It is not possible, Colonel Draven spoke up from the back of the room. One pilot cannot engage for aircraft across 4 states. The fuel requirements alone make it impossible. Not if the pilot uses the hijacked aircraft themselves, Avery said. She pulled up a tactical overlay. The 4 targets are following optimized paths. If I intercept the first aircraft here, force it down, I can use its remaining fuel and weapons to reach the second target. Then use that aircraft to reach the third. That is insane, Draven said. You're talking about stealing compromised aircraft mid-flight. I'm talking about exploiting enemy assets. Something I have done before in circumstances that remain classified. Avery turned to Wolf. It is high risk, but it is also high reward. 1 pilot. For intercepts. Minimal coordination required. Complete tactical flexibility. What do you need? Wolf asked. Immediate authorization to launch. full weapons load, an acceptance that I will be operating outside all standard protocols. I will be making decisions in real time based on combat conditions. No oversight, no second guessing. Draven started to object, but Wolf cut him off with a gesture. You have authorization. Launch immediately. Nakamura's crew will have an aircraft ready in 10 minutes. Avery headed for the door, Morrison falling into step beside her. I'm coming with you, he said. Negative. This is a single-pilot mission. You will need someone watching your back, coordinating with ground assets. Morrison's voice was firm. You taught me that great pilots verify their information. Let me be your verification, your safety net. Avery stopped and looked at the young lieutenant. He was scared. She could see it in his eyes. But he was also determined, ready to step into danger because he believed it was right. Exactly the kind of pilot his father would have been proud of. Can you fly a Raptor, Lieutenant? I am rated. Not as good as you, but adequate. Adequate might be enough. Avery made her decision. You fly chase. Stay on my wing. If something happens to me, you become primary intercept. Understood? Understood, Captain. They ran to the flight line. Two F-22s waited, Nakamura's crew swarming over them with final checks. The crew chief approached Avery as she started her pre-flight. Both aircraft are ready, ma'am. Full fuel. Full weapons. Nakamura hesitated. I know what you are about to do. It is beyond anything in the manuals. Beyond what most pilots think is possible. But I have seen what you can do. So I'm just going to say this. Come back. Both of you. That is the plan, Sergeant. Plans change in combat. I know. I've been on enough flight lines to see pilots leave who did not return. Nakamura's eyes were steady. Just make sure you are not one of them. We need pilots like you. Hell, we need people like you. Avery climbed into her cockpit. The startup sequence was automatic now, her hands knowing what to do without conscious thought. Beside her, Morrison settled into his aircraft with the careful precision of a pilot who knew he was about to face something beyond his experience. The tower cleared them for immediate departure. Avery pushed throttle forward and felt the Raptor respond. The runway disappeared beneath her. The sky opened above, and for the first time in 3 years, she was flying not away from her past, but directly into it. Reaper is airborne, she transmitted. Beginning intercept sequence. Morrison's voice came through the radio, steady despite the fear she knew he was feeling. Reaper 2 is with you. On your wing. Below them, General Wolf stood on the operations center balcony, watching 2 contrails climb into the morning sky. Beside her, Colonel Draven stood silent, finally understanding what he had failed to see for 3 years. That the quiet logistics officer he had dismissed was about to attempt something that would either save 100,000 lives or become the most spectacular failure in Air Force history. The only certainty was that Captain Avery Chun, the Reaper, was done hiding. Whatever came next would be written in the sky at supersonic speeds, with the lives of cities hanging in the balance, and a dead pilot proving that some ghosts refused to stay buried. The first hijacked F-22 appeared on Avery's tactical display while she was still climbing through Angels 30. The aircraft had launched from Langley and was already tracking toward Washington, D.C. Estimated time to weapons release was 11 minutes. Estimated casualties, if it reached the Capitol building, were 12,000. Avery pushed into maximum afterburner. The acceleration pressed her into her seat with crushing force. Beside her, Morrison matched her climb, his aircraft holding perfect formation position. The lieutenant was scared. She could hear it in his breathing over the radio. But he was holding steady. That was what mattered. Reaper has contact on Hostile 1, she transmitted. Vector 090, Angels 28, speed 600 knots, and accelerating. Beginning intercept. Reaper 2 confirmed. I have your wing. The tactical problem was mathematics and physics. The hijacked aircraft was ahead of her by 60 miles. It had a head start and a straight line to target. She needed to close the distance, establish firing position, and neutralize the threat before it reached populated areas. Standard intercept doctrine said it was impossible. The angles did not work. The fuel consumption would leave her unable to reach the second target. But Avery had never been particularly interested in standard doctrine. She adjusted her vector to an oblique approach, using the Earth's rotation and atmospheric conditions to gain fractional advantages in speed and efficiency. She calculated wind patterns and air density gradients in her head, finding the optimal path through three-dimensional space the way a predator found the fastest route to prey. The distance closed. 50 miles. 40. 30. The hijacked aircraft began evasive maneuvers. The programming had detected her approach and was attempting to throw off or intercept. The maneuvers were good, efficient, exactly what Avery would have programmed if she were designing an autonomous combat system, which meant she knew exactly how to beat them. She anticipated the pattern, positioned herself not where the aircraft was but where it would be 3 seconds later. The targeting solution locked. She fired her first missile and watched it track true. The hijacked Raptor deployed countermeasures and broke hard left, exactly as the programming dictated. Avery had already fired her second missile into the space where the break would take it. Both weapons impacted within half a second of each other. The hijacked aircraft's left engine exploded. The right engine flamed out from debris ingestion. The Raptor began its death spiral toward the Virginia countryside, far enough from population centers that the crash would kill no one. Splash 1, Avery transmitted. Hostile 1 is down. Proceeding to Hostile 2. But she did not proceed directly. Instead, she descended to the crash site's coordinates and circled once. The wreckage was scattered across farmland, burning in a dozen places. She made note of the impact pattern. The weapons had not detonated. The classified systems would need recovery. But the immediate threat was neutralized. Morrison's voice came through her headset. Captain, your fuel state. You used more than anticipated on that intercept. I know. Adjusting flight plan. She ran new calculations. The second hijacked aircraft was launching from Tyndall, heading toward Miami. If she flew direct, she would arrive with barely enough fuel for one engagement and no reserves for the remaining 2 targets. Time to implement the unconventional part of her plan. Reaper 2, I need you to return to Langley. Land, refuel, and proceed to intercept Hostile 3. I will handle Hostile 2. Negative, Morrison said immediately. I am not leaving you alone out here. That is an order, Lieutenant. The mission requires both of us to survive. If I do not make it, you're the only pilot who knows what we are facing. Trust me. There was a pause. Then Morrison's aircraft peeled away, heading back toward Langley. His voice was tight when he spoke. Do not make me explain to General Wolfe why I left you, Captain. Tell her I ordered you to execute the mission. Avery pushed south, burning fuel at a rate that made her gauges scream warnings. She had 9 minutes to cover 400 miles and intercept a target that was already halfway to Miami. The tactical display showed her the impossible geometry of the situation. Even at maximum speed, she would arrive 30 seconds after the hijacked aircraft reached weapons release range. 30 seconds that would cost 20,000 lives, unless she changed the equation. Avery pulled up the emergency protocols in her onboard computer. Buried in the classified sections was a procedure called Extreme Performance Override. It disabled the safety limiters on the F-22's engines, allowing them to produce thrust beyond rated capacity. The cost was catastrophic engine damage. The aircraft would need complete power plant replacement afterward, but for a few minutes, it would fly faster than anything else in the sky. She activated the override, felt the engines surge beyond their normal limits, watched her airspeed indicator climb past every number the designers thought was safe. The aircraft began to vibrate. The airframe stressed beyond its comfort zone. Warning lights illuminated across her panel like a Christmas display. But she was closing the distance. The second hijacked F-22 appeared on her scope. It was in its final approach to Miami, already beginning its weapons run. Avery had seconds, not minutes. No time for multiple missile shots. No margin for error. She switched to guns, closed in knife fighting range at a speed that made the approach suicidal. Her targeting computer screamed that she was too close, too fast, the angles all wrong. She ignored it. ignored everything except the sight picture forming in her heads-up display. She fired. The cannon rounds stitched across the sky in a perfect line. They impacted the hijacked aircraft's tail section, severing hydraulic lines and destroying the flight control surfaces. The Raptor pitched violently and began to tumble. Avery pulled up and away, her own aircraft shaking from the extreme speeds and the proximity to the dying fighter. The hijacked aircraft fell into the Atlantic Ocean 5 miles offshore. The splash was visible from the Miami beaches, but the weapons did not detonate. The city was safe. Splash 2, Avery transmitted, her voice showing the strain of the high-G maneuvers and extreme speeds. Hostile 2 is down. Fuel state critical. Proceeding to emergency refueling. She nursed her damaged engines toward Homestead Air Reserve Base. The override had bought her the speed she needed, but at the cost of her power plants. Both engines were showing temperature warnings that suggested imminent failure. She had maybe 5 minutes before they quit entirely. The base appeared on her nose. She transmitted emergency codes and was cleared for immediate landing. The tower could hear the distress in her engines, the high-pitched whine that said metal was destroying itself at molecular levels. She touched down hard, her landing gear screaming in protest. Both engines flamed out as she rolled down the runway, their destruction complete. The Raptor coasted to a stop under its own momentum. Avery shut down all systems and sat in the cockpit, breathing hard, listening to the ticking sounds of overheated metal cooling. Ground crew swarmed the aircraft. She climbed out to find a full bird colonel waiting for her, his expression showing confusion and suspicion in equal measure. "Captain, what the hell just happened to my airspace? Who authorized combat operations over American soil?" General Patricia Wolf, Nellis Air Force Base, under code Black Protocols. Avery pulled out her authorization codes. "I need immediate refueling and an aircraft swap. Time is critical." The colonel looked at her credentials, then at the smoking wreckage of her engines. "You just destroyed a $7 million aircraft. I just saved Miami. There are 2 more hijacked F-22s inbound to other targets. I need to intercept them in the next 40 minutes or 50,000 people die. Can you help me, or do I need to steal an aircraft?" The colonel's expression shifted from suspicion to understanding. "How fast can you be airborne?" 10 minutes if you have a Raptor fueled and armed. I have one, but the pilot who flew it needs medical attention. Engine fire during training. I will take it. Avery started toward the alert hangar. The colonel kept pace beside her, speaking rapidly into his radio. By the time they reached the hangar, a fresh F-22 was being towed out, ground crew already performing final checks. She climbed into the cockpit. The seat was different. The controls were identical, but felt foreign. Every aircraft had its own personality, its own quirks. She had 30 seconds to learn this one before she needed to trust it with her life. The engines started clean. The systems came online without errors. She ran through abbreviated checks and signaled ready for taxi. "Reaper is back in the game." She transmitted on the command frequency. "Hostile 3, I'm coming for you." Morrison's voice crackled through the static. "Reaper 2 has Hostile 3 on scope. Target is heading for Norfolk. I am in position to intercept, but my weapons are cold. Repeat, I have no weapons authorization." "You have authorization now, Lieutenant. Weapons free. Take the shot." There was a pause. Then Morrison's voice came back, steadier than before. "Understood. Engaging Hostile 3. Avery listened to the radio chatter as Morrison talked himself through the intercept. Heard him achieve lock. Heard him fire. Heard the confirmation that the 3rd hijacked aircraft was down. The young lieutenant had made his first kill. He would carry that weight forever. But he had also saved a city. "That leaves Hostile 4, Morrison transmitted. Target is heading for Atlanta. Your position? Climbing out of Homestead. I will be there." Avery checked her fuel and weapons. She had enough for one engagement. Maybe, if the universe was kind and the winds were favorable and she flew the perfect intercept, which meant she needed to fly the perfect intercept. She pushed northeast, chasing the final hijacked aircraft. Behind her, 3 cities were safe because a dead pilot had refused to stay buried. Ahead of her, one final threat remained. One final chance to prove that some debts could be repaid, that some ghosts served purposes beyond haunting. Atlanta appeared on the horizon. The hijacked F-22 was already in its attack run, and Avery Chun, the Reaper, prepared to make the shot that would either save a city or prove that even legends had limits. The fourth hijacked F-22 was 30 seconds from weapons release when Avery's radar locked onto it. The aircraft was tracking toward downtown Atlanta at 500 knots, its flight path optimized for maximum destruction. Conservative estimates put casualties at 40,000 if the attack succeeded. The Georgia Dome was hosting a college football game. The stadium alone held 75,000 people. Avery checked her weapons load. 1 AMRAAM missile remaining. 1 chance. No margin for error. No backup plan. Just a shot and the consequences. She had been here before. 47 times before. That moment when everything narrowed to the geometry of intercept and a fraction of a second between success and catastrophic failure. The difference was that those 47 kills had been enemy combatants in enemy aircraft over hostile territory. This was an American F-22 over an American city. The mathematics were identical. The weight was infinitely heavier. Reaper has hostile 4 on scope, she transmitted. Beginning final intercept. Morrison's voice came through her headset. He was still 5 minutes behind her, too far to help. Fuel state, Captain? Enough for the shot. Not enough to make it home. Negative. You need reserves for landing. Let me catch up. We take it together. No time, Lieutenant. This ends now. Avery positioned herself for the shot. The hijacked aircraft was good. Its programming was adapting, learning from the failures of the previous 3 intercepts. It knew she was coming. It was ready. The evasive maneuvers began before she even achieved firing position. Hard brakes, altitude changes, chaff and flare deployment. Everything designed to defeat missile lock. But the programming had a weakness. It was logical, predictable. It followed optimal defensive patterns because those patterns had the highest probability of success. Avery did not need highest probability. She needed certainty. And certainty came from understanding your opponent better than they understood themselves. She did something the programming would not anticipate. She broke off the intercept, turned away. The hijacked aircraft, interpreting her maneuver as retreat or systems failure, returned to its attack vector. Committed to the target run. Predictable. Avery rolled inverted and pulled back on the stick, bringing her nose around in a maneuver that pushed the forces beyond what the aircraft was rated to sustain. Her vision tunneled. Blood drained from her brain toward her feet. The soot inflated, fighting to keep her conscious. She forced breath through clenched teeth and held a turn. The targeting solution appeared. Perfect geometry. The hijacked aircraft had committed to its attack and could not evade without abandoning the mission. Avery had created a choice the programming could not resolve. Mission success required flying into her missile. Mission survival required retreat. She fired her last AMRAAM. The weapon left the rail clean. Its rocket motor ignited. The missile tracked toward the hijacked aircraft with terminal precision. The programming chose survival. The hijacked Raptor broke hard, deploying every countermeasure, executing maximum performance evasion. But the break took it away from Atlanta, away from the stadium and the city and the 75,000 people who would never know how close death had come. The missile impacted the hijacked aircraft's starboard wing. The explosion was clean, surgical. The wings separated. The Raptor tumbled from the sky in a death spiral that would take it into the Chattahoochee River outside the city limits. No civilian casualties. No collateral damage. Just one more piece of American equipment destroyed to save American lives. Splash 4, Avery transmitted. All hostiles neutralized. Mission complete. The radio erupted with voices. Controllers confirming the kill. General Wolfe demanding her status. Morrison shouting something that might have been celebration or relief or disbelief. And beneath it all, the quiet recognition that Captain Avery Chun had just accomplished something that would be studied in tactical courses for generations. For aircraft, for cities, for successful intercepts. 0 civilian casualties. Reaper, what is your fuel state? General Wolf's voice cut through the chaos. Avery checked her gauges. The numbers were unambiguous. She had burned everything getting to Atlanta. The extreme speeds, the high-G maneuvers, the desperate sprint across half the eastern seaboard. Her tanks were nearly dry. Fuel state is critical, General. Insufficient for return to any Air Force installation. I'm looking for civilian airports within glide range. Dobbins Air Reserve Base is 15 miles northeast of your position, Wolf said. They are cleared for your emergency landing. Can you make it? Avery ran the calculations. 15 miles. Current altitude. Current airspeed. Glide ratio. The numbers were close. Very close. Maybe. I can make it, she said, because uncertainty was not something you admitted when people were listening. She turned toward Dobbins and began the glide. Both engines were still running, but on fumes. Any moment they would flame out, and she would be flying a very expensive glider. She extended her glide path, milking every foot of altitude for maximum distance. The base appeared on the horizon. Runway visible. Emergency vehicles already positioning. 5 miles out, her left engine quit. 3 miles out, the right engine followed. The sudden silence was profound. No roar of turbines. No vibration. Just the whistle of wind over the airframe and the quiet beeping of warning systems telling her what she already knew. She was out of fuel, out of options, out of everything except the skill that had kept her alive through 47 previous impossible situations. Reaper is going in dead stick, she transmitted. All systems critical. Approaching Dobbins for emergency landing. We have you on visual, the tower responded. Runway is clear. Emergency crews are standing by. You're clear to land. Avery lined up on final approach. The aircraft was handling well for a dead glider. The F-22 had been designed with enough aerodynamic efficiency to make dead-stick landings theoretically possible. She was about to test the theory. The runway rose to meet her. She held the nose up, bleeding off speed, managing her energy like a miser counting coins. Too fast, and she would overshoot the runway. Too slow, and she would stall and drop like a stone. The margin was measured in knots and degrees. The wheels touched asphalt. The landing gear absorbed the impact. She deployed the drag chute and felt the deceleration press her forward against the harness. The aircraft slowed. Stopped. She sat in the cockpit, hands still on the controls, and felt the adrenaline begin to fade. For cities saved. For aircraft destroyed. One impossible mission completed. The price was 3 damaged engines and 1 aircraft out of fuel. The mathematics said it was worth it. Her hands said it was worth it. The trembling in her fingers said the cost had still been high. Ground crew helped her out of the cockpit. Her legs were unsteady from the sustained forces and the adrenaline crash. A full bird colonel approached, his expression showing respect and disbelief in equal measure. Captain Chun, I just watched you land a Raptor with no engines from 15 miles out. That was the finest piece of flying I have seen in 30 years of service. Thank you, sir. Just doing my job. The hell you were. That was not a job. That was artistry. A vehicle pulled up and General Wolf stepped out, having flown from Nellis on a transport that landed minutes before. She approached Avery with an expression that mixed relief and something that looked like vindication. Captain Chun, outstanding work. For successful intercepts. 0 civilian casualties. You just saved approximately 100,000 lives. The mission was a success, General. But the cost was high. For F-22s destroyed. 3 engines damaged beyond repair. Aircraft can be replaced. Wolf's voice was firm. People cannot. You made the right calls. Every single one. Morrison's F-22 appeared overhead, circling once before landing. The young lieutenant taxied to the apron and shut down his aircraft. He climbed out and ran toward them, his young face showing exhaustion and exhilaration. Captain Chun, he said, I monitored the entire engagement. That final intercept, the way you forced the programming to choose between mission and survival. I have never seen anything like it. Your father would be proud of you, Lieutenant. You made your first kill today. That is not easy. It will stay with you. I know, ma'am. Morrison met her eyes. But I also saved Norfolk, because you taught me to verify my information, to trust my instincts, to understand that being a great pilot is not about following doctrine. It is about knowing when doctrine does not apply. You learned that from your father, not from me. I learned it from both of you. General Wolf gestured to a secure vehicle. We need to get you both back to Nellis. There will be debriefings, media questions, congressional inquiries. Your identity is now public knowledge, Captain. The entire country knows that a logistics officer just saved 4 cities. They're going to want answers. Avery looked at Morrison, then at the 2 F-22s sitting on the apron, one out of fuel and one carrying the weight of its first kill. She thought about the quiet life she had built, the anonymity she had treasured, the peace she had found in counting supplies instead of counting kills. All it was gone now, burned away in the fires of combat and the necessity of using skills she had tried to bury. But standing on this flight line, surrounded by people who understood what she had just accomplished, Avery felt something she had not felt in 3 years. She felt like she belonged. Let them ask their questions, General. I am done hiding. Wolf allowed herself a slight smile. Good, because the Air Force is done letting you hide. You just prove what I have known for 3 years. You're not just a good pilot, Captain Chen. You're the best pilot, and the country needs the best. Avery looked up at the sky where the contrails of her intercepts were still visible, white lines marking the path of salvation written at supersonic speeds. The Reaper had risen from the dead. The question now was what came next. What did a ghost do when it stopped haunting and started living again? The answer, she suspected, would be written in the same sky. One flight at a time, one mission at a time, one choice at a time between who she had been and who she could become. The flight back to Nellis took 6 hours on a military transport. Avery sat in the cargo bay with Morrison, both of them too exhausted asleep, but too wired to rest. Through the small window, she could see the landscape rolling beneath them. The country she had just saved. The cities that would never know how close disaster had come. General Wolf sat across from them, reviewing reports on a tablet. Major Durand had been formally charged with treason, conspiracy, and attempted mass murder. Her partner, a former Air Force Systems engineer with a grudge against the military, was in FBI custody. The hijack protocols had been purged from all systems. The immediate threat was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. Your face is on every news channel, Wolf said without looking up from her tablet. The logistics officer who saved 4 cities. They are calling you a hero. Some are calling you a miracle. The conspiracy theorists are having a field day trying to figure out how someone in supply management could fly like that. What are we telling them? Avery asked. The truth, or as much of it as we could declassify. Wolf set down the tablet. The Pentagon is preparing a statement. Captain Avery Chen, formerly a classified test pilot, came out of retirement to stop a domestic terror attack. 47 kills will remain classified. The specifics of your missions will remain classified. But the fact that you exist, that you are real, that is now public knowledge. What about my logistics assignment? Over. You cannot go back to counting supplies after this. The world knows what you can do now. Wolf met her eyes. The question is what you want to do. Morrison leaned forward. General, with respect, Captain Shun just flew the most remarkable combat mission in Air Force history. She should be training the next generation, teaching us what she knows, making sure her skills do not disappear when she finally does retire. Wolf nodded. That is one option. The Air Force is prepared to offer you command of a new F-22 training squadron, full authority to design curriculum, handpick your instructors, shape the future of air combat doctrine. And the other options, Avery asked. Return to test pilot status. Help us develop the next generation of fighter aircraft. Or take a position at the War College, shaping strategy at the highest levels. Wolf paused. Or you can walk away. Retire with full honors. Disappear again, if that is what you want. Avery looked at Morrison. The young lieutenant was watching her with an expression that reminded her of herself 15 years ago. Eager, determined, ready to learn everything the sky could teach. She thought about the 12 pilots she had lost over the South China Sea, the one she could not save, the weight she had carried for 3 years. What if she could prevent other pilots from carrying that weight? What if her skills could save lives not just through combat, but through teaching others to survive what she had survived? I want to train pilots, she said, but not just combat tactics. I want to teach them how to make impossible decisions, how to calculate risk when lives hang in the balance, how to live with the choices they make when there are no good options. Wolf allowed herself a rare smile. That is exactly what the Air Force needs. Consider it done. You will report to Nellis in 2 weeks to begin building your squadron. Pick your instructors. Design your program. Make it everything you wish you had when you were learning. The transport touched down at Nellis just after sunset. The base was lit up like a celebration. As the cargo ramp lowered, Avery saw the crowd waiting. Hundreds of base personnel, pilots and crew chiefs and administrative staff. People she had worked with for 3 years who were seeing her clearly for the first time. Nakamura stood at the front of the crowd, his weathered face showing quiet pride. Behind him, she saw the faces of junior enlisted personnel she had helped over the years. Airmen she had trained. People who had known her only as the quiet logistics captain who always had time to explain a requisition form or fix a supply problem. As she walked down the ramp, the crowd erupted in applause. Not the polite recognition of rank, but genuine appreciation for what she had accomplished. Avery felt Morrison beside her, the young lieutenant standing straighter under the recognition. Nakamura approached and saluted. "Welcome home, Reaper. We have been waiting 3 years to call you that. I'm still just Avery, Sergeant." "No, ma'am. With respect, you stopped being just anything the moment you got in that cockpit." Nakamura gestured to the crowd. "These people know what you did. They know what it cost. And they want you to know that you have our respect. All of us." Avery looked at the assembled personnel, saw Colonel Draven standing at the back, his expression unreadable, saw junior officers who had dismissed her as just a logistics captain now understanding what had been hiding in plain sight, saw the recognition that she had spent 3 years avoiding and now could not escape. "Thank you," she said simply. It was inadequate, but it was all she had. The debriefings took 3 days. Congressional committees wanted details. Pentagon officials wanted tactical analysis. Intelligence agencies wanted to understand how the security breach had happened. Avery answered their questions with the same precision she brought to combat. Clear, concise, uncompromising. On the 4th day, she received a visitor in her temporary office. Colonel Draven stood in the doorway, his posture stiff, his expression showing the discomfort of a man who had realized he was profoundly wrong. "Captain Shun," he said, "may I speak with you?" "Of course, sir." Draven entered and closed the door. He did not sit. "I owe you an apology. For 3 years, I dismissed your knowledge, questioned your competence, treated you as less than you were. I was wrong, completely wrong. You were operating on the information you had, Colonel. My cover was designed to be convincing. That is generous but inaccurate." Draven met her eyes. "The truth is I saw what I expected to see. A logistics officer, someone beneath my notice. I missed the signs because I was not looking for them. That is a failure of leadership. My failure." Avery studied him. The colonel was many things, but he was not, apparently, incapable of growth. "I accept your apology, sir. I have been reassigned. Non-command position at the Pentagon. Officially, it is a promotion, but we both know what it really is." Draven's voice was level. "I will spend the rest of my career pushing papers because I failed to recognize what was right in front of me. The irony is not lost on me. What you do with the rest of your career is your choice, Colonel. The assignment is just the starting point." Draven nodded slowly. "For what it is worth, Captain, what you did was extraordinary. Not just the flying, the decision to come out of hiding, to risk everything to save people you did not know. That is the kind of leadership the Air Force needs more of." After he left, Avery sat alone in her office. Through the window, she could see the flight line. F-22s were being prepped for afternoon training flights. Pilots were conducting pre-flight checks. The normal rhythm of a fighter base continued, unmarked by the drama that had unfolded days before. Morrison appeared in her doorway. "Captain, the general asked me to tell you that your squadron designation is official. 57th Fighter Training Squadron." The Reapers. She paused. I think she wants the call sign to become something people aspire to instead of something that haunts you. Avery felt something shift in her chest. The Reapers. A squadron named after the ghost she had been, filled with pilots who would learn not just to fly, but to survive, to make impossible choices, to carry the weight that combat demanded. I want you as my executive officer, Avery said. You understand what it means to learn from mistakes, to verify information, to trust your instincts when doctrine fails. Morrison's eyes widened. Ma'am, I'm just a lieutenant, barely qualified. You made your first kill saving Norfolk. You stayed on my wing when you could have turned back. You earned it. Avery stood. Besides, you are going to help me teach the next generation of Reapers. I need someone who remembers what it was like to be hungry for knowledge, to want to be great. I accept, Morrison said. Then, quieter, thank you, Captain, for everything. That evening, Avery drove to the base memorial. The stone monument listed the names of every Nellis pilot who had died in service. She found a quiet bench and sat, looking at the names. So many lives, so many stories cut short. Her 12 pilots from the South China Sea were not listed here. Their deaths had happened in places that did not exist on any official record, but she carried their names in her memory. Thompson, Rodriguez, Kimmel, Lawson, all of them. 24 souls who had trusted her leadership and paid the ultimate price. I cannot bring you back, she said quietly to the memorial, but I can make sure fewer pilots follow you. I can teach what I learned, share what I know, use the skills that cost so much to maybe save others from the same fate. The wind picked up, rustling through the desert scrub. Somewhere on the flight line, an F-22 fired up its engines. The sound was familiar, comforting. Home. Avery stood and walked back to her vehicle. Tomorrow she would begin building her squadron, selecting instructors, designing curriculum, creating something that honored the dead by protecting the living. The Reaper was no longer a ghost. She was a teacher, a leader, a survivor who had finally found purpose beyond the kill count. The sky was waiting. The students were waiting. And Captain Avery Chun, who had been dead for 3 years, was finally ready to show them what it meant to truly live. 6 months later, the 57th Fighter Training Squadron flew its first operational exercise. 12 F-22 Raptors climbed into the Nevada sky at dawn, their formation precise and purposeful. In the lead aircraft, Captain Avery Chun watched her students execute the maneuvers she had taught them. Watch them make decisions under pressure. Watch them become the pilots the Air Force needed them to be. Morrison's voice came through the radio, calm and professional. Flight lead, Reaper 2 has visual on the aggressor aircraft. Beginning intercept sequence per training protocols. Execute, Avery responded. Show me what you learned. She watched Morrison's aircraft break from formation and begin the intercept. His approach was textbook perfect. Not because he was following the book blindly, but because he understood why the book existed and when it applied. 6 months of intensive training had transformed the eager lieutenant into a tactical thinker who could adapt doctrine to reality. The exercise continued for 90 minutes. Intercepts and evasions. Complex scenarios that tested judgment as much as skill. Problems that had no perfect answers, only choices with different costs. When it ended and the squadron returned to base, Avery felt satisfaction that had nothing to do with kill counts or combat statistics. She had taught 12 pilots to survive, to think, to lead. That was a different kind of victory. The debriefing was held in the squadron ready room. The walls were decorated with patches and photos, the accumulated history of 6 months building something new. Avery stood at the front, reviewing the exercise performance on the main display. Overall assessment is satisfactory, she said. Lieutenant Morrison, your intercept was well executed. Captain Hayes, your defensive maneuver showed good tactical awareness. Lieutenant Park, we need to discuss your fuel management. You were cutting it too close at the end. The students listened with the focused attention of people who knew their instructor had earned the right to critique. They had learned her history over the past 6 months. Not from official briefings, but from the way she flew, the way she taught, the way she carried herself. They knew the Reaper was real. They also knew she was more than just a call sign and a legend. Dismissed, Avery said. Flight schedule for tomorrow is posted. Morrison, stay back. The other pilots filed out. Morrison remained at attention, his expression curious. Mum? At ease, Lieutenant. Avery pulled an envelope from her flight suit. General Wolf asked me to give you this. Your promotion came through. Congratulations, Captain Morrison. Morrison took the envelope, his eyes widening as he read the contents. Captain? Ma'am, I have only been flying with the squadron for 6 months. You made your first kill saving Norfolk. You have logged more combat training hours than most pilots see in 2 years. You understand what it means to lead. Avery smiled. Besides, I need a deputy squadron commander. The paperwork is killing me. I accept. Thank you, ma'am. Morrison paused. My father would have loved this. Would have loved to meet you, to learn from you. Your father would be proud of the pilot you have become. Not because of your rank or your skills, but because you understand what matters. You know the difference between being competent and being responsible. I learned that from you, Captain. You learned it from experience. I just gave you the framework to understand it. After Morrison left, Avery walked out to the flight line. The sun was setting over the Nevada desert, painting the Raptors in shades of gold and crimson. Nakamura was supervising the post-flight maintenance, his crew moving with the efficiency of people who took pride in their work. The old crew chief approached as Avery stopped beside her aircraft. How did the youngsters do today, ma'am? Better than I expected. Worse than they think. About right for where they should be. Nakamura nodded. You are building something good here, Captain. Something that will outlast all of us. These pilots you are training, they're going to go out and train others. Pass on what you taught them. That is legacy. I hope so, Rio. I hope they never need what I had to learn. But if they do, I hope they are ready. They will be, because you're making sure of it. That night, Avery sat in her office reviewing the next month's training schedule. The squadron was growing. More pilots were being assigned. The program was expanding beyond what she had initially envisioned. General Wolf wanted to make the Reapers the premier fighter training squadron in the Air Force, the standard against which all others were measured. There was a knock on her door. She looked up to see a young second lieutenant standing at attention in the hallway. The officer looked nervous, her eyes carrying the mixture of determination and uncertainty that Avery recognized from every pilot who had ever wanted to prove themselves. Ma'am, Second Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo reporting. I was told to check in with you for a squadron assignment. Avery gestured her inside. At ease, Lieutenant. Welcome to the Reapers. She pulled up the personnel file. Okonkwo had graduated top of her class from the academy. Rated excellent in all flight performance metrics. Recommended for fighter assignment by her instructors. But what caught Avery's attention was a note in the file. Father killed in training accident when subject was age 8. Motivated to honor his memory through exceptional service. Your father was a pilot, Avery said. Yes, ma'am. F-16S. He died when his aircraft had a mechanical failure during a training mission. Okonkwo's voice was steady. I fly because he cannot. I want to be the kind of pilot he would have been proud of. Avery thought about Morrison and his father. Thought about her own journey from combat pilot to instructor. Thought about the chain of influence that connected one generation of aviators to the next. Then you came to the right squadron, Lieutenant. We're going to push you harder than you have ever been pushed. We're going to teach you things that are not in any manual. We're going to prepare you for the moments when skill alone is not enough and you need judgment and courage and the ability to make impossible decisions. Yeah, I'm ready, Mom. Maybe. We will find out. Avery handed her a tablet with a training schedule. Report to the ready room at 0600 tomorrow. Bring your questions and your humility. Leave your ego at the door. The sky does not care about your academy ranking. It only cares about whether you can survive what it throws at you. Okonkwo took the tablet and saluted. Thank you, ma'am. I will not let you down. After the lieutenant left, Avery walked to the window. The flight line was quiet now, the aircraft secured for the night. Somewhere out there, pilots were sleeping or studying or dreaming about flight. Tomorrow they would take to the sky again, learn again, push themselves again, and she would be there to guide them, to share what she had learned through blood and fire and impossible choices, to make sure that fewer of them had to learn the hardest lessons the way she had. Her phone buzzed with a message from General Wolf. Media wants interview about 6-month anniversary of the 4-city saves. Your call whether you do it. Avery typed her response. Respectfully decline. The story is not about me. It is about the pilots we're training to prevent the next crisis. Wolf's reply came immediately. Understood. Keep building your squadron. You're doing exactly what the Air Force needs. Avery set down her phone and looked at the photograph on her desk. Not the old one of her in a flight suit with her face turned away. A new one. The 57th Fighter Training Squadron on the day they received their official designation. 12 pilots and their instructors standing in front of their aircraft, faces clear and proud. She was in the center of the front row. No longer hiding. No longer pretending to be less than she was. Captain Avery Chun, the Reaper, the instructor who had once been the deadliest air combat pilot of her generation, and was now the teacher who would ensure the next generation was even better. The call sign that had haunted her was now the name of a squadron dedicated to survival. The skills that had cost her so much were now tools for protecting others. The ghost had become flesh and blood again, not through combat, but through the harder work of building something that would outlast her. If you enjoyed this story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, or share if you have witnessed someone's hidden strength revealed in a critical moment. Outside her window, the stars were emerging over the Nevada desert, the same stars she had navigated by during missions that officially never happened, the same stars that would guide her students as they learned to fly and fight and survive. Avery turned off her office light and walked toward her quarters. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to pass on what she knew. The sky was waiting. It was always waiting. And for the first time in 3 years, she was ready to meet it not as a weapon, but as something better. A teacher, a leader, a survivor who had learned that the greatest skill was not how efficiently you could destroy, but how effectively you could protect. How many lives you could save. How many pilots you could prepare for the impossible moments that would define their careers. The Reaper had risen from the dead, but what she had become was so much more than what she had been. She was proof that even the most lethal among us could find redemption, that ghosts could become guardians, that the skills forged in combat could be transformed into something that built instead of destroyed. The night air was cool on her face as she walked across the base. Above her, an F-22 flew a late patrol, its navigation lights blinking against the darkness. The pilot was one of hers, trained in her methods, prepared by her instruction, ready for whatever the sky demanded. That was her legacy now. Not kills, not missions, not the classified operations that would remain secret forever. Her legacy was the pilots who would fly better because she had taught them, who would survive because she had prepared them, who would lead because she had shown them how. Captain Avery Chun climbed the stairs to her quarters and looked back one last time at the flight line. The aircraft gleamed under the security lights, beautiful and deadly and perfect, tools in the hands of those who understood their purpose. Tomorrow she would fly again, teach again, build again. The work was never finished. The mission was never complete. But for the first time since the South China Sea, she knew she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The Reaper was home, and the sky would never be the same.